Hi, today I'm coming to you from my office here on the beautiful campus of Eastern Shore Community College. Behind me, please notice the Steeler memorabilia. I want to talk to you about point of view. I want to clarify and make sure everyone understands point of view. Some discussion areas where you did the group work on point of view were very good, and others were not so good. Everybody got their points because we're not grading you, or I'm not grading you on whether or not you are correct, but rather whether you are working on understanding key concepts. But let me just please review. You have a first-person narration, and that is when a character in the story is telling the story, and you'll hear the narrator use words like I or we, just like you would if you're writing an essay in first person, like a personal narrative. And so when you talk about first-person narrators, there's no such thing as limited omniscient or omniscient. Those are types of third-person narrators. First-person narrators are naturally limited, just as each of us are as we might tell our own stories. We can only tell what we can see, what we can observe, and what we know in our hearts and head, but we can't tell other people's thoughts and feelings. We don't have the ability to do that. So first-person narrator is naturally limited, but we never refer to a first-person narrator as limited. We can refer to a first-person narrator as unreliable, though. And if there's a reason you can't trust the narrator, for example, those of you who had 2D, the Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, in the text, he may be somewhat unreliable because, as many of you noted, he is immature. He seems like he has a chip on his shoulder, and we might have to question his take on things because he's got a bit of an attitude. So he may be considered unreliable in some ways. When we read The Telltale Heart, I promise you that insane narrator is unreliable. We have to be very careful about whether we believe what he says or not. For third-person narrator, this is when you have someone outside of the story telling the story. Doesn't mean we're going to be able to name this person. This person is not the author. You distinguish the narrator from the author. But someone outside the story is looking in and telling the story. The limited omniscient narrator usually tells the story from someone's particular perspective, and the knowledge is limited, as it said, but yet the writer knows things, or excuse me, the narrator knows things that others would not. And a perfect example is Story of an Hour. Story of an Hour is told from a limited omniscient point of view. The narrator knows what Mrs. Mallard is doing up in her room and what she's thinking. No one else in that story does, and if it wasn't for the narrator, the reader wouldn't know it either. And it's also different than if Mrs. Mallard told her own story. That would be a first-person narration, but since she dies at the end, she couldn't tell her own story. And then the last type of third-person narrator is the omniscient narrator, who knows all, knows everything that's happening everywhere all the time, and knows what's in the hearts and heads of all the characters. And we usually pretty much assume that this omniscient narrator is very trustworthy and reliable. The exercise that you all did on page 77, 2A, is a third-person narrator, and the narrator, as some of you noted, might be female. She seems to have a knowledge of relationships and ideas about how men feel about women and that kind of thing. So we have an omniscient narrator because it says it is universally acknowledged and seems to have this complete understanding of the ways of men and women in relationships. 2B is first-person narrator. That's Huck Finn himself. And as some of you noted, a lack of education, an informality, and whether or not he's reliable is a very good question, and someone noted about how he told the truth mainly. There were things he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. So when Huck Finn is telling us about Mr. Mark Twain and what he has written, we kind of wonder whether or not he really knows those things about Mark Twain or what's really true or not. So it is a little questionable, but a definite first-person narrator there. Probably pretty reliable, and actually if you've read the book, you know he's pretty astute and observant, and even though he's not educated, he has a real good intuition about really what's right and wrong. He's not tainted by societal constraints. Letter C, 2C, from David Copperfield, first person narration. And there is a sense of drama here. I forget who noted that, I'm sorry. But the gonging of the 12 o'clock at night as he's being born is pretty dramatic. But that is a first person narrator. And then 2D is also first person narrator. Holden Caulfield is telling his own story. So that's it for point of view, but I hope you have a better understanding about that, because it's going to be a very important term as we continue our study in this class. All right, from ESCC, I'll say goodbye.